Hello, BookTube. As I mentioned in an earlier video, we are in a transition period from one great old BookTube event, Victober, where, guided by our hostesses, we study and revel in the glories of Victorian literature. We are moving from that storied old BookTube event straight to another one, which is Nonfiction November, hosted by the mighty Olive at a Book Olive and a bunch of other great hosts. I'll leave all the information down below. Nonfiction November, I think, is on its 4th or 5th or 6th year. It's been going strong. It's now part of the ecosystem of BookTube, and what its goals are very simple. The goals are very simple. Olive and her cohorts have done it up to the nines. There's all sorts of social media interaction that you can do, Goodreads, even TikTok, and there are prompts. And as usual, the prompts are wonderful because they're so general that you can really apply your creativity to them. But really, underneath all of that, the goal of Nonfiction November is to lessen the stigma that still attaches to nonfiction, even in a bookish community like BookTube, and get you to read more of it. It's usually because of the way that it's mishandled in high school and college. It is largely, in a lot of readers' minds, considered to be boring, considered to be book learning, without any of the creative free range of fiction. That is not true. It is much, in my opinion, much more satisfying than fiction. I've been ranting against the made-up stories and in favor of nonfiction for the whole time I've had this channel, and long before that. The goal of Nonfiction November is very simple: to get you to read more nonfiction. To read some if you read none, to get you to add it to your reading diet if you don't have any, and to get you to read more if you already read some. And as usual, in 2020, I am going to try to do what I tried to do in 2019 and 2018, which is to read only nonfiction in the whole course of the month of November, except for fiction I am commissioned to review. Those of you who are new to this channel, I think one of my boys was telling me the numbers of how many people are new to this channel just in the last week or two. I think I forget what it was. He thought it was cool. He just couldn't understand why it was happening on this channel. I said, boyo, I don't understand either. But one way or another, those of you who are new to the channel, when I say commission, I'm a professional book critic. That's what I do. It's my passion. It's also my livelihood. So if some editor has commissioned me to review a work of fiction, then I will be reading and rereading that in the course of November. And that accounts for a lot. I do a lot of reviewing in a lot of places. So there will be fiction in my own reading diet in the month of November. But I'm going to shift from, ordinarily I'm around 80% nonfiction, 20% fiction. In November, I am going to shift to 99% nonfiction and leave just the commission stuff for the fiction reading. And that's going to be a lot of fun. And I'll probably make videos about it because nonfiction is a tremendous open world of fun to read. In the typical parlance, fun is the last word in the world that anybody would use in association with it. But all you have to do is talk to somebody who reads nonfiction, and you'll see the light go on in their eyes. It's not drudgery. It is fun. Enormous fun. And a point that I made before on this channel, it's far more interactive than fiction, because you can learn more about each subject, including learning about the sources on which the book you're reading is based. And then you can read the sources on which those earlier books are based, and then the primary sources. And then you can roll it around in your head yourself, maybe come up to a new interpretation. That's how new histories are born. But anyway, I'm not going to do a TBR for Nonfiction November because I'm hoping in the month of November of 2020 to read around 115 books. And ratio being what it is, 100 of those will be nonfiction. I'm not going to make a list of 100 books on this channel, and I don't know what a lot of them will be. A lot of them come to me as curveballs out of nowhere in the course of the month. It's just the curveballs that are fiction will have to wait. But I wanted, instead of a TBR, I want to give you a list of suggestions of nonfiction works on a variety of subjects that are coming out in the month of November, just so that you can see their titles and maybe see if they're of interest to you. We'll start with World War II history. It's a particular favorite of mine. I think the World War II is indisputably the greatest military conflict that's ever happened in the history of humanity, and the most interesting. It's not only the greatest in terms of size and people involved and ordnance and changes in the world, it's also the greatest in terms of the heightened sense of right and wrong, of good and evil, of valor and desperation. Thucydides and Herodotus would have drooled at the mouth for a conflict like this. So I read all the mainstream World War II books that come out, biographies or histories. And this one is by Simon Reed. I haven't read it yet. It's The Iron Sea, and it is a big history of the Allies hunting down the warships of Adolf Hitler. The concerted Allied attempt in the European theater to destroy the Nazi Navy. So there'll be famous stories in here, and there'll be less famous ones. I'm up for it either way. Then we have this thing. This is by Priya Atwal. This is Royals and Rebels. A big new history of the Sikh Empire, which is... I have read bits and pieces of this story. I haven't read this book, but I've read bits and pieces of this story, and it is full of the most amazing personalities. Larger-than-life personalities. Speaking of larger-than-life personalities, what's up, baby? What's the matter? What's the matter? I'll just continue, and then I'm all yours. I will. I'll just continue. I haven't read this either, but I can't wait. This is a subject that really appeals to me. Then we have this thing. I have read this, and I loved it. This is Ben Wilson's book, Metropolis, A History of the City, which he defines right from the beginning as mankind's greatest invention, and proceeds to put his money where his mouth is. How are we doing for light? Can we make this any more visible? No. What if we hold it over here? Is that any better? No, it's not. No, it's a dark day. It's pouring snow outside. Well, that's close enough. This is a history of big cities. Not just cities, but metropolises, megalopolises, big cities. It's tremendous. Just tremendously good. Not, again, not entirely original. Those of you who read history will have read histories of cities before, but totally engaging for all that. Same thing with this next one. This is by Michael Wood. This is The Story of China. This is the U.S. edition of the companion book to his documentary, and it's the last 300 years. It mainly concentrates on the last 200 or 300 years of Chinese history, and does so in a wonderful, wonderful way. I read a different edition, didn't have this cover. I believe it was the UK edition, but I'm eager to reread it. I'm eager to reread the American edition and just see. This next one we've seen on this channel many times. We saw the advanced copy. We saw the finished copy. I wanted to bring it up again because I really enjoyed it. This is by Peter Stothard, and this is The Last Assassin. The hunt for the killers of Julius Caesar, and mainly one killer in particular, through whose story Stothard gives you the broader aspects of what Octavian, Julius Caesar's successor, of what lengths he was willing to go to kill essentially regicides. And it's really good. It's not long. Won't take you any time to read. This next one, well, Julius Caesar has name recognition. So does this next author. This next author has name recognition. This is the biggest release for November. This is A Promised Land by President Barack Obama. This is his... Boy, that lighting is just terrible, isn't it? Is there any way to fix that? Any way to... You can't even see the books. I don't know why I'm holding this up. No, look at that. That is... It's just complete white. You can't even see what I'm talking about. And there's no way... Okay. Well, I can talk about it anyway. You don't need to see it. Of course, Barack Obama is known for his books, right? He became known for his books long before he became known as president. What if we backlight? Sorry, it's bothering me. That's all. You're not able to see these things. And that's the whole point of the video. No, there's no way to do it. All right, well, I'll hold it up. You'll get a faint suggestion. You'll get my words. I have not read this book yet. I have it. Critics that I know who have either read it and reviewed it or simply read it don't have a lot of positive things to say about it. The one thing that you couldn't say about either of his two books, his earlier books, is that they were boring. And that is the word that's coming up. Critics, I know it doesn't matter. He's already got his advance, and it was astronomical. And he's going to move copies just by being in the store to sell them or to sign them. But in terms of a work of literature, this is one of the few public officials that we kind of expect might write a worthwhile book. And this is his story about being in office. So, I'll read it myself and see. But to say the least, I had high hopes. And the initial responses that I'm getting from the few people I know who've dipped into this are not glowing. So we will see. Then his next one is a follow-up to a book that will be in a lot of your libraries. It's in this room. and I've given away I don't know how many copies of it. It's by Philip Lopate, and this is The Glorious American Essay, 100 Essays from Colonial Times to the Present. And this is a kind of follow-up to his The Art of the Personal Essay, which belongs in all of your libraries. It's an incredible anthology of essays, probably the greatest anthology of essays that's ever been done. And this is sort of a historical look at the art form, as opposed to The Art of the Personal Essay was more of an impressionistic look. And I've only read the introduction to this. It's fantastic. I haven't read the book yet. The book will have a lot of the usual suspects and a lot of people who have been neglected and aren't anymore. Lopate is fantastic at this sort of thing, so I'm looking forward to reading and rereading all the essays in this volume. This next one is by a figure who's well known to us. He's no longer with us. He has shuffled off this mortal coil, but it's one more book by Harold Bloom. This is The Bright Book of Life, which is all about novels that he loves to reread. And this author, he was a literary critic and poobah, and I've had my issues with him, of course, for many, many, many decades. But the one thing that he excels at, he excels at many things, but the thing he's guaranteed to be good at is writing about rereading, writing about pondering literature. He does that fantastically well. Two or three of the last books that he wrote in his life were on basically that subject, and this is one of them. This is probably the last of them. And it invariably, when he writes about the things that come to his mind when he revisits work, whether it's poetry or fiction, invariably I learn something about those works. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Then we have this thing. This is going to appeal to a lot of you who are map fans. This is by Jessica Meyer, and it's The Eternal City. It's a history of Rome in maps. And it's a little bit pricey. It's, I think, $40 new, and it's just high-definition maps going all the way back to, Republican days in Rome. We have maps of Rome in almost all of its incarnations and eras. Ends up being fascinating. My volume is out in the other room. I have it just sitting there on the desk, and I routinely just stop and look at it. So those of you, as a perfect thing, as a gift, if you have a history fan or a map fan or both, this is a perfect gift. It comes out in November. All these come out in November, except maybe this next one. This next one's a little bit, its provenance is a little bit tangled. I'm not sure that this is actually going to see the light of day when it was promised. So don't quote me on this one. Quote me on all the others. But you can quote me on this, that it's really good. This is tremendously good. When it finally does appear, it's well worth your time. This is by Fernando Cervantes, and it's Conquistadors. The untold story of the Spanish discovery of Europe, of the Spanish Empire, and the pillaging of the Americas. And it is just riotously good. Just fantastically good. Full of personalities, full of narrative momentum. Oh my. An oft-visited subject. I've read many books on this subject, but this was just... I hope it looks like this when it finally comes out. I hope it does come out in November. This is the only one I'm not sure of, but boy, oh boy, for the history buff. And again, another history buff thing, and also another World War II thing. The Iron Seas was predictable, familiar ground, naval battles of World War II, especially in the West. This is also extremely predictable, extremely well-trod ground, but I read them anyway because I know the subject really well, and any author could have a really good day, could really hit the ball out of the park. And this is by Alan Allport, and it's Britain at Bay. I believe this is the first volume of a projected 2-volume. This is just the beginning of Britain's war. Prior to, from the beginning, and prior to the entrance of America into the war. A big, thick thing full of primary sources. I haven't read it yet, but it's exactly the sort of thing that I will gobble up. And then I will see. I don't go into these things predisposed to like them. I just go in predisposed to be interested in them. If I get to page 300 of this thing and I'm bored stiff, well, that's the author's fault. It takes a lot of work to make World War II boring. If, on the other hand, I'm at page 300 of this thing and I'm thinking, boy, I never thought of that. What a great insight. I didn't know that. So much the better. Then we have a biography. This is a literary biography. This is The Unquiet Englishman by Richard Green. It's a life of Graham Greene, who Richard Green and the publicist for this book just unhesitatingly now call a great author, a great novelist. I don't think he was that, but the main question, I haven't read this book yet, but the main question that it will have will be, what does it do with the great 3-volume biography of Green that stands right now as the definitive work on this author? What does it bring to the table that isn't in those books. Aside from being one volume instead of three, those 3 volumes are was it Norman Sherry who's the author of that 3-volume set? One way or another, you'll all know the one I'm talking about. You Green fans will, and it is just the normal Victorian triple-decker definitive thing that came out in the latter half of the 20th century. This has that looking over his shoulder, inevitably. So the question here is going to be not so much does Richard Green bring any new facts to the table, but does Richard Green present a reason to read this other than, in addition to the Norman Sherry volumes? I'm hoping. We shall see. I'll be have a chip on my shoulder just a bit. I don't like the steady progression of overestimating this writer that has been happening since he died. But I'll take it anyway, just in case the author has a lot to say. Same thing with this next one. This next one is by David Brown. It's on an author I know really well. So again, this will not be a circumstance where I'm looking to learn anything new. Instead, it'll be a question of what kind of a job the author does in illuminating what I already know, in showing it from different angles or writing it really well. This is The Last American Aristocrat, The Brilliant Life and Improbable Education of Henry Adams. The author of The Education of Henry Adams, so you have to work the word education into any work about him. I've read many biographies of Henry Adams and many studies of him, literarily and otherwise, and this is the latest one. I hope that it's not derivative. I hope that it's really entertaining. We shall see. I have it, and I'm getting to it soon for the month of November. And I have another biography. This one is groundbreaking. It's going to be a tough sell. I haven't been able to convince any editor to let me review it for money, for instance. I will still try to review it because it looks definitive. It's by Peter Seawall, and it is the first volume of a biography of Pope Benedict XVI. This starts with his youth and his service in the Nazi youth program all the way to, I think, Second Vatican II, yeah, from 1965. When he was, by then, an ideological mover and shaker in the Catholic Church, known to be a living repository of lore and doctrine, but not really guessed then by much of anybody as a future pope, much less a history-making future pope who would then resign, step down while alive. So he's had many biographical treatments over the years, and he's written lots of books himself. I've reviewed a couple of those, but this looks to be, as an old friend of mine used to say, sometimes you get a biography that comes along, just assumes its subject is dead, and writes that way. And this looks to be that. This will be when he was just Joseph Ratzinger, so it won't be, the papacy won't come into this, but I'm still looking forward to it. Fascinating subject. Then we have something we've seen on this channel before. This is by Peter Godfrey Smith. This is Meetazoa, Animal Minds and the Birth of Consciousness. All about our fellow animals, living in and evolving in the sea and developing complex neurons, rudimentary intelligence. Peter Godfrey Smith, of course, is the author of Other Minds, which is a book about, in large part, the intelligence of octopuses. And you get a lot of that in this book that you can't see. I don't know why I'm holding it up. You can't see it at all. Maybe if I remember, I will list these books down below. I didn't expect that you wouldn't be able to see the iPad. But I've already read this. I've already reviewed it. It's terrific. As far as popular history and popular evolution goes, if you know somebody or if you are somebody who likes to read that, can't go wrong. Then we have by Robert McFarlane, who a lot of you will know. He's done a few, what I consider to be slightly soft, slightly woo-woo nature writing books. This is his latest one, Ghostways, which you're not going to be able to see. It's 2 journeys in unquiet places where it's the main draw of it is the lyricism of his prose, where he writes about the natural world in England. If that's your cup of tea, you're not going to go wrong with this author, because his prose is gorgeous. It's the only reason I've been able to put up with the slightly woo-woo nature of his observations. But this is, his last couple of books have been so evocatively written, so Annie Dillard-esque, that I'll now read anything that he writes, so especially on these lines. And then, speaking of a subject on which I will read anything, this is by Simon Garfield, and it's called Dog's Best Friend, The Story of an Unbreakable Bond. This is the Season's dog book, which is about, in one part is a potted history of man's 27,000 year history with dogs, knowing them, working with them, being buried with them, genetically engineering them. But it's a thread that runs throughout that's every bit as touching, which is the author's relation with his own dog, a black lab who has epilepsy and who is the focus of the author's life in a way that dog owners will recognize immediately, and that is really well evoked in this book. So I know you get bombarded with dog books every season, but this is one to maybe consider. There's at least half of it, a narrative strand running through at least half of it is tremendously moving. So it becomes that rarest of all things, a dog book that Steve recommends. Let's keep in mind, Simon Garfield, no offense to Simon Garfield whatsoever, but there is only one two-legged creature in the world who should write a book about dogs, and it's not him. But nevertheless, this is heartfelt and belongs on a shelf of dog literature. And as far as we'll stick with nature, this next one is a complete downer in general. But there's one specific case that it is trying not to be a downer, so it cites a specific case that looks positive. This is by Levinson Wood, and it's The Last Giants, The Rise and Fall of the African Elephant. It's mostly fall, of course. These things are mercilessly butchered, first for their ivory, but nowadays for food. Except in Botswana. Botswana has a bit of a success ratio when it comes to keeping elephants alive and even growing the size of herds. And Levinson Wood wants you to know that. He wants to concentrate on that, on the future of these animals in the wild. They are every bit as intelligent as human beings. They're every bit as cultured as human beings. They're every bit as emotional and empathetic and compassionate as human beings can be, some of them. They are our equals. Another apex animal in the world. They don't have hands and they don't speak English, but they are our equals. And they don't have guns, so they are being decimated. And Levinson Wood is trying in this book to maybe give you a glimmer of hope. There's nothing wrong with that. I am commissioned to review this. I will see what I make of it in a final reread. And then we've got, how many more here? Oh, well, we've got a few more to go. The next one is also something we've seen on this channel. It's a work of history. I have read it. I am commissioned to review it. So I'll be writing my finished thoughts, but I loved it. There was no doubt that I would. I have nits to pick with it and issues to bring up, but this is Seb Falk. This is The Light Ages, an intentional play on the Dark Ages, where he tries to draw the picture of how there was plenty of intellectual inquiry going on in the so-called Dark Ages. It wasn't all just benighted Viking raids and horny monks. There was a lot of other stuff going on. A lot of it was going down the wrong path, wouldn't end up being true, but as a book, as a spirited inquiry into scientific curiosity in the so-called Dark Ages, this was terrific. So if you have a fan of popular science or popular history, they're going to love it. And you're probably going to know someone who might be a fan of this next book. It's by the so-called philosopher John Gray. I read it. I admit I found it thought-provoking, although it turned my stomach. It is Feline Philosophy, Cats and the Meaning of Life, in which our philosopher generates a whole book by watching his cat as it proceeds about its day of sleeping for 23 hours, cleaning itself for 45 minutes of the remaining hour, and spending the last 15 minutes torturing living things to death for fun. He finds life philosophies in that, and you cat people will too. If you're a cat person, you have to have this book. You have to read it. I'm not a cat person. I still enjoyed it. Then we have more Roman history. We've seen this already on this channel. This is Anthony Barrett. I have not read this yet, but I'm anticipating enjoying it. I've never read a book by this author I didn't enjoy. It's Rome is Burning, about the Emperor Nero and the famous fire, the Great Fire of Rome that Nero was blamed for and then blamed the Christians for. Well-trod ground, again, but it'll all be a question of what kind of a job the author does on it. And the same thing is true with this last one, which I read and actually really liked. This is by Paul Morley, and it's called A Sound Mind, How I Fell in Love with Classical Music and Decided to Rewrite Its Entire History. Any music fan that you have on your potential book-giving list, and especially any classical music fans, just got to read this thing. They're going to be arguing with Paul Morley for most of the book, as I was, but boy, oh boy, is it good. Just written along the classic lines of an outsider comes to a closed community and blasts it with fresh insights, fresh observations, challenging, revolutionary observations. Just a classic iteration of that, only for classical music. Really the classical music, one of maybe two classical music, because Jane Swafford wrote a Mozart book, has a new Mozart book that I think comes out in December. But that and this would be the two classical music books for the general audience that are coming out this season. And coming out in November. All of these books are coming out in November. So these books could be fodder for your nonfiction November. Because there aren't going to be long waiting lists at your library. The waiting list for all the made-up stories about upper middle class Connecticut divorce. There probably won't. The library probably won't even have ordered some of these things. So you'll be first in line for them. So I thought I would show them to you. I wish I could have done a better job showing them to you, but that's all right. For Nonfiction November 2020. So you have that is a good look at some of the mainstream nonfiction that's coming out in November of 2020, all of which will fit into one prompt or another. But whether you do the prompts or not, and whether you do these books or not, you should give some serious consideration to joining Olive and her merry band and having fun with nonfiction in November. You're going to be hearing a lot about it from me, that's for sure. So in the meantime, we're going to wrap this up. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.